there's a new study about the effectiveness of the COVID vaccine in children. Remember, that was pushed on children in 2022. It was approved by the FDA. Here it is, protection from COVID-19 vaccination and prior SARS-CoV-2 infection among children aged 6 months to 4 years. Well, now we have 614 children this study looked at from 6 months to 4 years, the same age group. And what did they find? They found this. There was no difference in risk of infection or symptomatic COVID-19 by vaccination status alone, regardless of timing of vaccination or manufacturer type. However, naive participants, that means someone who's never had COVID before, naive participants vaccinated with Pfizer BioNTech were more likely to be infected and experience symptomatic COVID-19 compared to naive and unvaccinated participants. Now, there's a thing that says HR 2.59. That's a hazard ratio. So what that means is these kids, basically children, were 2.59 times more likely to have an infection or to experience symptomatic COVID-19 than unvaccinated participants. And
that's just so everyone knows, it's 250% more likely to develop a COVID symptom scenario than if you had nothing at all.
So now we have 4 studies showing that not only are the vaccines not effective, they actually have a higher chance of developing infections or symptoms. And here's an article that really brilliantly puts it together. 4 studies established that vaccinated individuals ultimately face a higher risk of infection compared to those who are not. And at the same time, you have the CDC still going out on social media. Mandy Cohen, head of the CDC, goes out on social media and advertises the vaccine. She writes this: the single best way to risk less severe illness and do more of the things you enjoy is to get vaccinated against COVID and flu. Have you made your plan to get vaccinated? Now, let's stay on the vaccine conversation, because a lot of these manufacturers like Pfizer, like Moderna, they had such a great success with the COVID vaccine that they're moving on to other vaccines. Moderna is moving on to the RSV vaccine. This is a respiratory virus. It can have complications if you're older, immune suppressed, or in very, very young children. And that's where they're testing it in. They're testing it in kids in Panama, 5 months to 7 months old. So extremely small infants here for this RSV vaccine test. And there's a problem. There's what they call a safety signal, a little bit of a roadblock, but don't worry, they'll get around that roadblock. That's what the headlines say. And you can look at this. Moderna's RSV vaccine run into safety roadblock. What kind of roadblock? Well, it's in the study, there's 5 cases of severe to very severe lower RSV respiratory tract infections. Those were reported among 40 of the babies who received the dose, compared to just 1 in the placebo group. What happened to those babies, those infants? 5 of them, all of them required hospitalization. 1 needed mechanical ventilation. And Del, you know what's interesting about this? As a journalist, I'm reading this and I look, and they had to correct this article, the safety roadblock article. And what did they say? Well, apparently the FDA was really looking out for us because they found this. Well, the author says, correction, December 11th, this story has been updated to make it clear that Moderna informed the FDA of the safety findings that triggered the study pause, not the other way around. Biospace regrets the error. So yet another journalist is finding out the FDA is not monitoring these things. They're relying on the company to go, oops, our problem. And sometimes the company doesn't say, oops, our problem. But let's look at the study, the actual study trial, because this is interesting. They had 2 interventions. They had 2 different types of RSV vaccine. They're both mRNA. This is where these vaccine industries are going, this new technology. But you see, against a placebo. So this is a very big story that they use a placebo, an inert placebo.
We say no placebo-based trials were used in the pre-licensure phase of the 16 vaccines on the CDC childhood schedule. All of the safety trials right there on the right, how long they looked at it, did they have a placebo? None of them. When they finally do it on an RSV vaccine program, suddenly they go, whoa, stop. Kids are getting sick. People are being injured. Now, normally, if you don't have a placebo group, right, because they did show that they had 1 severe illness in that placebo group. So what they would all obviously say without placebo group is kids get sick. RSV, it happens. Like that would be the natural, severe illness, needing a respirator, needing an iron lung, that would happen whether they got the vaccine or not. That's what they argue when there's no comparator. But when you actually can compare that group and say, nope, sorry, clearly a different result in the vaccinated compared to the placebo group, now you know why it's so important, New York Times. This is why it's important. By the way, was that trial 3 days long, Jeffrey? Was it 3 days?
They found the problems from what I could see around day 85 to 141 in the trial. So, several months into it that they find these problems.
But now on all of these, just go down to 6.1, the clinical trial experience. This is what they used to approve this for safety. Can you all read with me? In 3 clinical studies of this hepatitis B vaccine, 434 doses of Recombavax HB were administered to 147 healthy infants and children up to 10 years of age. I wonder how many of them were infants. Remember, this is given to day 1 old babies in America, and they call it CPS if you don't give it, up to 10 years of age. So 147 kids who were monitored for 5 days. And there's no placebo group. So anything that happened in that 5 days, who knows? I mean, you just say, well, that was a natural occurrence. And there's a whole list of side effects. I'm not going to get into that they did see. 100, I'm just asking you, New York Times, Washington Post, all of you, CNN, is a 5-day safety review of 147 children between 0 and 10 years old adequate to mandate a vaccine on every child born in America on their first day of life? I mean, if it is, then we don't come from the same planet. Then let's just do it for all of it. Cancer drug, every cancer drug, all I need is a 5-day safety trial. Any lupus drug, a 5-day safety trial. Any eczema or any of the things that we see this long, just why even bother showing me the side effects? You won't have any side effects as long as you only do the study for 5 days. And by the way, you can go to that page and read every single vaccine. And if you can find a placebo trial, call me. I'll stop making this statement. You won't. They don't exist.